Paul, Otis, Eddie and Melvin are 4 veterans who come back to Vietnam to find the remains of their squad leader, and a hidden cache of gold that no one else knows about. The arrival of Paul's son David is the first of many complications as they try to claim the gold and come to terms with their pasts. Da 5 Bloods, which is a title almost impossible for a white Englishman to say without sounding like an idiot, is the newest Spike Lee joint, picking up off renewed enthusiasm for his work off the back of the resounding success of Blackkklansman. Altogether, it's a messier, more sprawling and uneven work than that film, but nevertheless a fascinating, entertaining and challenging movie. We begin with the old gang back together in Vietnam. As they go out clubbing in an Apocalypse Now themed bar, no less, we're introduced to them as they get to know each other again. All old men now, it's clear that their experiences in Nam left different impressions on them and their lives. Perhaps most importantly, Paul, who is altogether more fragile and more forceful than the rest, frightened and disturbed by a disabled beggar and being observed by old Vietnamese men in the bar. Paul, it seems, never really left the war behind, and Lee draws a direct line between that and his vocal support of Trump. Yeah, this is a Spike Lee movie, so throw subtlety out of the window and strap in for some politics. Paul is a Trump supporter, right down to the MAGA hat, much to the consternation of his friends. He seems unable to drop the racial animus of the Vietnam War, using slurs and VC to refer to many of the Vietnamese characters in the film. Bitter about his lack of opportunities since the war, Paul articulates his political beliefs as a way of lashing out at those in power, a position that's pretty pointedly dismissed by his friends and by the film. He's a fascinating character, and his significance to the film can't be underrated. Despite the fun poke to him early on for voting for Trump, it's a pretty sympathetic portrait of someone who's completely disenfranchised. But at the same time, it's ultimately damning of him, I think. It helps that Delroy Lindo portrays Paul with a real force of conviction, pressing points and vocally arguing his position, while also clearly being unstable and difficult, sometimes dangerous, to deal with. Most importantly for Lee's political focus, Paul is simultaneously a victim of oppression and racism, while also to some extent participating in and reinforcing a narrative of American imperialism in Vietnam. Back to the story. The gang's Vietnamese guide arrives in the bar, and the first of many flashbacks to the war begins, showing the fatal final mission of the squad, when they were delivering a box of gold bars to South Vietnamese fighters. In these sequences, Lee employs a grab bag of tricks, transitioning to a grainy 16mm and 4:3 framing to recall newsreel footage, which also is liberally used in the film, alongside still images and titles explaining their significance, just like in Blackkklansman. There's plenty of references to Vietnam's portrayal in cinema, from the aforementioned Apocalypse Now bar to shots of helicopters coming out of the sun and Ride of the Valkyries playing over a boat trip. Most notably in these flashback sequences, the surviving Bloods are played by their older actors, diffusing a lot of the voyeuristic thrill that action set pieces should in theory provide. Instead of seeing younger men run and gun, we see the older men that they become. The combined effects of these techniques is almost Brechtian. It provides these shocking and destabilizing moments that invite the viewer to consider how Vietnam War narratives have been constructed over time in American media. It's really notable that throughout the film, most characters refer to the war as the American War, as it's typically called in Vietnam. I think that's the first time I've actually seen that in an American movie. In these flashback sequences, the squad leader Norman, Chadwick Boseman, is portrayed in this glowing, kind of regal light as an enlightened figure who preaches non-violence and also freedom from racial prejudice, as well as advocating for reparations. In fact, that's basically how he views the secret cache of gold, arguing that taking it from the American government is repossessing it, and that it should be redistributed to the black community in America. There's something of the kind of righteous heist vibe from Inside Man here, but it's tied to a historical re-examination, both from Boseman's perspective in the late 60s and also from the older men's perspective in the modern day. That question of how the older men continue to interpret these radical political lessons in the modern day, and the perspective of David, representing a generation kind of removed from that, but with its own radicalism as well, is a constant subtext in the political discussion in the film. And while we're there, on the subject of David, after first seeing Jonathan Majors in The Last Black Man in San Francisco last year, I'm very happy to see him here establishing himself as a definite talent to watch. He does a great job of showing the generational differences between him and the older men without resorting into those sort of oh no, I've got avocados instead of a house deposit, millennial stereotypes. Certainly there's a kind of line between their combat experience and his lack thereof, while there's also a lot of acknowledgement around what they have in common, both politically and through their identities as well. The film runs at 2.5 hours and is packed with events. I'm not going to try to unpack them all here, but it's definitely worth watching the movie and thinking through those issues. It's really important to engage with work like this, where black filmmakers take long looks at an aspect of their identity and how it connects with political and historical moments. That's always important, and particularly I think with all of the recent events around Black Lives Matter protests and discussions in the media about racism that are often poorly informed or in bad faith. There's been some great writing on this film, which I encourage you to seek out. In particular, I thought Campbell's review in Empire, which I've linked below, is really, really good. As for the rest of Da 5 Bloods, it's packed full of political discussion and devices, including monologues to camera, montage-like editing of newsreel and stock footage, as well as further aspect ratio changes too. But most surprisingly of all, the plot itself seems to change over several times. The stakes completely alter on a few occasions, and that can be pretty jarring throughout. All in all, it's a very interesting addition to Lee's filmography. I think it kind of seeks to draw a line from the action focus of Inside Man to the political depth of Malcolm X. And it's less accessible than Blackkklansman, but I think it works well as a companion piece to that film. That's it from me, but I'd love to know what you think about this film, so let's have a chat in the comments below. Have a good one, bye for now.